Welcome to the Hidden STEM podcast. My name is Elena Pascal, and we are kicking off our podcast today with Gabrielle. We are a pretty small podcast, just getting started to just amplify the voices of current seniors in STEM fields. We want to kind of just talk about and discover some of those hidden pathways to belonging, some of those hidden nuggets for success, and just some of those jewels that we know only seniors can share because they are right in the middle of it. They have been going through it for the past 4 years. I believe they have a lot to share, and we have a lot to learn from them as well. Welcome to Gabrielle, who's our first guest. In just a minute, I'll let Gabrielle introduce herself, but I'll start by giving you a little background about me first. My name is Elena Pascal. I definitely have a bias towards STEM. I have a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from Wayne State University, and I'm currently pursuing my master's in higher education administration at Indiana State University. I look forward to using my background in engineering and pairing it with this master's in higher ed to support STEM students in the future. I would like to allow our first guest to introduce herself. So Gab, why don't you tell us, just give us a little bit of background. Tell me about where you are, what you're up to, how's the semester going?
Hello, I'm Gabby, and I am a senior currently at the University of Michigan. That's the big house in the background, and I'm majoring in neuroscience. So pursuing an honors bachelor in neuroscience right now. So the semester has been going really well, but it's also a little chaotic finishing up everything for my thesis, because to get the honors degree, you have to do a senior thesis project based on research you've been doing. So now it's getting into crunch time, like you were saying, with graduation coming up. The due date is getting closer and closer for that. So a little bit chaotic right now, but it's been going well. So yeah.
Tell me about what kind of elementary, middle, high school, you attended.
I went to a Catholic, so private middle school that I also was there since first grade. So I went elementary through middle school with pretty much the same people. And that was definitely a small school. There wasn't many people. It was also predominantly white as well. So that wasn't really a super diverse environment, but I was almost used to that because I'd been going to school there since first grade. So yeah, and then high school, I definitely went to a more diverse high school, and that was Mercy, and it was an all-girls Catholic high school. So also staying with the Catholic school vibe, which was, I liked it a lot. It was nice still being able to be in an environment that was like not super large, was more discipline focused as well, but also more diverse, like I was saying, and coming from my middle school. So that was really nice. And then I would say, thinking about when I was exposed to science, though, it would probably be in middle school. I had a really, really great science teacher who was super into science and also recognized that I was good at science and told me that I was good at it and to stick with it, try it out. Just could tell that it was something that I was strong in. And so I really kind of just ran with that. It's funny because I still am, like, love reading, and I always thought I would kind of do something more English kind of focused when I was growing up, just because I always was reading books like all the time. So, but then kind of after she said, "You're really good at science, you should stick with this," I'm like, yeah, I am kind of good at science. So then when I went to high school, I started taking like honors biology, honors chemistry, and then that turned into AP biology, AP chemistry. And it was like, I was doing well in all these classes. And even on the AP exams, I was scoring like 4s and 5s. So then I was getting college credit for those biology, chemistry classes. So then when it came time to college, I was like, well, I already have credit for a lot of biology classes. I'll just take the next class that I test into. And that ended up being a huge, really, really difficult course. Biology 172, it's like notorious at Michigan for being super difficult. Like half people that start the class drop it. And within that, people don't even stay pre-med. So it's one of the, I had credit for like the just basic 100 level bio from, like I was saying, my AP exams in high school. So then I was almost in a harder biology when I got here, but I did really well in the course. Like I got an A+ in it. And so I was like, I think this is definitely something that, even though these are really hard classes that just my brain works with, So I was like also really interested in it. I now teach for the same professor that I took that class with. So it's a really full circle moment, but yeah,
That's
that's
cool.
probably, yeah.
So how did you pick neuroscience though? Because
Yeah,
I mean, there's so many, different divisions within science.
yeah. I've always been a little bit interested in neuroscience, even in biology 172. It's a little bit more basic bio when I always found, yes, I'm good at basic biology, but I think that asking deeper questions is more interesting. And I'm trying to remember the first class that I took at Michigan. I think it was this class called Neuroscience 230. And a lot of people recommended taking Neuroscience 230 if you were pre-med, which I was after I decided I was just going to stick with the science thing. I was like, okay, I'll probably go to grad school, med school, something like that. So I was like, okay, yeah, pre-med, that's me. This Neuroscience 230 class has a lot of topics that are on like the MCAT, and it's always nice to have a class about it before you go and take some huge hard exam. So I was like, okay, I'll take it. That sounds interesting. And that's the most intro level neuroscience class I think that we have at Michigan. And so I took that and I loved it. That was probably my favorite class that I've taken at Michigan ever. It was an amazing class with a great professor who was super, super interested in neuroscience, really, really deep into research as well. And he would always stress the benefits of research in combination with learning. That was the same semester that I actually joined a research lab because I was like, he would always talk about how you can learn so much more from actually doing research and work in the field that you're studying. So not only was that class influential in me pursuing neuroscience, but even getting into the research side of things in undergrad as well.
So kind of back to your your early years, did you attend any like summer boot camps, like any like math science camps, anything like that while you were in high school or middle school?
In high school, I attended actually at Wayne State, so your alma mater, science camp. I think it was the summer after my sophomore year of high school. I did a STEM camp at Wayne State, and that was really cool. We did like a brain dissection. So I guess I was technically exposed to neuroscience then, but I didn't really know that it was neuroscience. It was more just introduced as science, but
Mhm.
that was really awesome. I knew that I liked science, so it was just cool to be doing a program like that, also with other high school students interested in science. And then I also did the summer after my junior year an ACT course at Wayne State. So that
Okay.
wasn't, I guess, a science boot camp, but
Yeah.
I liked the one the first summer. So then I did it again the next summer, and I was just taking the ACT that year. So I did that camp. I'm really glad that I did that. That was cool one. And then also I just would never have had the opportunity to do that if I didn't do that camp. And like you were saying, it's exposure to things that you're not familiar with at a young age, which I think is really important. So I look back on it and I'm like, oh, I'm really glad that I did that.
Yeah, yeah. Because I'm listening to you now, and that was a seed, is what that
Yeah.
was. That was a seed that was planted. You just told me you dissected a brain. Now you're at Michigan about to complete your degree in neuroscience. So it was a seed early on that was planted for you, and it just grew. Look at that. You went to school and you watered it during high school, and then
Mm.
to, Michigan and
Yeah.
continue to grow that seed. And so it's grown from there. So that kind of stuff fascinates me. I don't know.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I never even thought about it like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm weird like that, but that's pretty cool.
Mm.
Tell me about, your classroom environment. And you can kind of split it up. I would imagine that maybe your classes early on were different than probably the classes that you've probably had this year and maybe last year. Tell me about your environment. Like, did you feel like, how'd you feel? Did you belong? You feel like you could navigate it okay?
Yeah, I would say that it's definitely daunting, especially because I went to very small middle school, high school. There was literally like 250 people in my graduating class. So in high school, so to go from that to there being like 600 people in some of the just the classes that I take in a lecture hall at once. Like,
That's a lot of people. You said 600 people in one
yeah,
class.
yes. So
Mhm.
all intro level classes I took my freshman year, I would say had 600 people in each class. The only one that didn't was my Latin class because no one takes Latin. There was literally 15 people in it. So that was the only small class that I had freshman year and probably even sophomore year. Like there's 600 to then sophomore year it went to like 300 people in the classes. So not as big of lecture halls, but still a lot of people. More people that even went to my entire high school were in the classrooms that I was in for just
Mhm.
one class. So that was crazy. But I'd say it definitely got smaller in my, honestly, not even junior year. I think it started getting small my senior year because a lot of it is just seminars for your major with like 20 people in it, and you're just starting to learn the faces of people. That's the hardest part about Michigan, I think, is it's really hard to get to know professors until your junior or senior year because there's just so many people in the courses that even if they know your name, you don't really have a relationship with them because they're teaching so many people. So I think
Mhm.
that was something that I really liked, the switch in the classroom environment. As I got older, is actually getting to talk to my professors, know them, they know things about me. Some of them are now readers on my honors thesis, getting to actually meet with them in a deeper way than just going to their office hours, you know? Because it's like, yeah, you go to office hours, but there's 50 people in their office hours sometimes. Because it's like, I feel like at other schools, people are like, if you go to office hours, you'll meet professors and relationships. And it's not really that simple at Michigan because in a class of 600 people, a lot of people have that same thought of, oh, I'll go to office hours and meet the
Mhm.
professor and things like that. So I think it's even more just researching with professors, taking their seminars. You have to go like 2 steps further than anywhere
Uh,
else, which I think is daunting at first, but it's actually really good in practice and teaching people to be more of that go-getter personality because things aren't just handed to you. It's not like, oh, you go to office hours and so automatically, boom, you have someone that'll write you a letter of rec. It's like, no, you have to go to office hours, do well in that course, end up majoring in that, take their seminars, do a thesis that they're readers that they can learn about your research, things like that. You have to go the extra mile really here just because there's so many people, which I think is a good skill in life. So I actually really, really appreciate it because it was one of those things that was daunting freshman year. I was like, wow, I like you got to feel like just a number, but then you realize ways to make it individualized and personalized. And I'm really glad that it wasn't just easy like that. It's something that you have to work for. And I think it's actually really helpful for life because
Yeah,
life
you're
is
right.
you. There's a lot of people you're competing with always in life. So it's
Mhm.
honestly good to be exposed to that right off the bat in college because it's not like this really small school environment. It's more like the real world actually is. You can't just do one thing and expect to be given something. You have to go the
Yeah,
extra mile, you know?
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you just spoke about, you said you have to like do things to make it more individualized. Like, what did you do? Like, what were your tips on? Because it's hard if you can't, really, maybe you have a question that just your question you want to get answered. Like, what are some things you did to kind of find that individualized attention, you know, for your needs?
Yeah, 100%. I did utilize my freshman and sophomore year going to office hours, not only my professors, but also at Michigan, we have these things called graduate student instructors. So it's basically graduate students that, in my case, it would be they're in the PhD program in biology, just broadly. So
Okay.
they'll host these office hours and you can go ask them questions about the topic. And they're also a lot more connected with the material often than the professors are because they're in the midst of their PhD, kind of studying these things every day. They're also a lot more connected to it. And I found that really helpful. And GSIs will actually, if you develop enough relationship with them, sometimes connect you with professors as well, because obviously they're going to have a closer relationship with the professor. So I actually feel like going to graduate student office hours is a little bit of the hack to, like you were saying, getting that individualized attention because you can go ask your specific question, also get to know more about the field because there's someone that's in the field. That
Mhm.
was really helpful. And then I also feel like getting involved in research was also extremely helpful in making it more individualized because I'm sure you know this, but professors are all connected to each other. So in my research lab, I'm working with Dr. Jenkins, and he knows this professor on campus. I take those people's classes. They remember him. I tell them that I'm in his lab. And then that's also a way to learn more about the field, get tips from them, things like that.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's like the ultimate networking right there.
Yeah. Even
Yeah.
yesterday, like in my friend's class, my PI like taught in her class. And she was like, "Oh, my friend's in your lab." Things like that. Like, all right.
Mhm.
Like you were saying, it's really just networking, honestly.
That's good. That's the kind of stuff I was looking for. So that's helpful. I think those are I think you just shared two really good nuggets, for students trying to navigate, find their way on a really big campus. You
Mhm.
mentioned the graduate students,
Yes.
the graduate teaching assistants, and then doing research. That's a really good one. That's a good one as well. I'm just a proponent of helping students, the best way we can. And I think you have to, this is the challenge with academia. Academia is that institution that, they're so proud of, we've always done it like this, and they're so proud about that. Whereas I think my personal philosophy is like, I'm a out of the box thinker. I can be creative, and I can push the envelope. And I think that each generation, so you got COVID, you got COVID, you got post COVID, you've got the generations after COVID that I still feel like we see lingering effects. And those students' needs, they're changing.
They're changing.
Different. Their needs are, and I think we as higher education professionals, you have to realize that and come alongside students that support them and not be so stuck on this. This is the way we've always done it. This is the only way that works, when that's really not the case, so.
I agree. I think academia is definitely the more stuck in its way field. So it's really interesting to see.
How do you think you were able to make connections as a student of color, on your campus to help you feel like you belong there?
Yeah, I feel like it's exactly what you said. You go into these big classrooms and there's literally like 10 probably Black people in the whole class of like 600 people. And it's like, wow, you can really see how underrepresented people are in STEM when you actually are going through it and living it. And it's like, oh, you see all these statistics, like we need to increase engagement, all these things. And you're like, this is why, like, this is real. Yeah, this is actually a real problem when you're in these fields, in these environments. There's no one that looks like you. Even I'm trying to think, even any of my classes now, I don't think there's any other students of color even in the classes that I'm taking. And it's almost something that you, in a bad way, get used to, not something, it's something that you notice every time and it doesn't change. And you're like, oh, this again, kind of thing. So I think it's definitely hard to find your sense of belonging, but I think that makes me also interested in things like this with increasing representation, because I see like it's very difficult. I'm in the Black Undergraduate Medical Association, so that's been really helpful in connecting with, meeting other Black people in the STEM field. I would say I joined that even my freshman year. So we have the Trotter Multicultural Center. So that's where like all the Black kids hang out. So they have study tables, things like that where you can go to, which is really helpful. It's kind of like seeing someone older than you too that did it. So I remember this girl, Johari, was in it when I was a freshman. She's now at Mount Sinai Medical School, and she's a good she also was in research, majored in neuroscience, did all these things. So it's, you see someone did it before you and you're like, oh, I can do that too. There is this path.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So did you feel like, because I definitely think it's like, it just depends on your background. I think some people, if you grow up in, predominantly, Black neighborhood and environment, it can be like a shock. And you don't feel like you belong. You can not feel that way. You can go in thinking, yeah, I'm probably the only Black person in most of my classes or all of my classes, or, the only girl. That was my struggle. I was like, when I got to my, my senior level classes, I was definitely the only Black person, and I was almost always the only girl too. So, but I didn't really care. I kind of got to where, I don't know, it wasn't a hindrance. It wasn't a deterrent for me. I do think there were some challenges with it for sure.
Yeah.
Just kind of being able to like relate to people. Like sometimes
like a little bit
you're
of
not gonna hang out after class. Like we might not like go get something to eat together and study. But I can socialize with you to get something out of it for me,
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. And so I feel like it's possible to have that mindset too, that, race and ethnicity are a factor. You think about it, but it doesn't stop you.
Yeah.
It's not a hindrance. So have you found that to be true? It seems like maybe so, but and if so, has it been that way, like your whole time at Michigan,
Yeah, I would definitely say that's true. And I think it goes back to that I've always just been in predominantly white environments. So that wasn't even a shock for me when I came to Michigan, like it is for some other students. So it wasn't even something that I had to get used to. It was something that I had been a part of since first grade. Every school I went to was like that. So it wasn't even something that it's something that I've always noticed, but not something different when I went to college. And it's definitely been something from the beginning that I noticed. But I think I have the same mindset as you, as yes, I'm the only one, and that's a problem. But I'm going to have more of these transactional relationships almost with people in my classes and professors and things like that. So kind of, like you were saying, it's just something you learn to accept in a way, and doesn't really form as a hindrance, because to me, I'm like, I'm doing the best in these classes, things like that. Obviously I belong, you know what I'm saying? So that was always for me a little bit of a motivating factor. I felt like I'm also more of, in a class, I'm the person asking questions, answering questions, speaking up, things like that. I feel like also has always contributed to me being like, oh, yes, I definitely belong here, because I've always put my best foot forward and succeeded, so that also, it's like proving that you
Yeah.
belong there in a way.
For sure. For sure. What do you think were your major obstacles that you faced in college? What do you think were the
That's a good
biggest challenges?
I feel like I'm just thinking more recently, your mind always goes more recent things, but even I think it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about people in academia thinking that how things were previously is how they always have to be, and that people have to make certain unrealistic sacrifices or things like that. So I know I'm a big person on balancing work with outside activities. I think that prevents a lot of the burnout that we see in academia and things like that, is having a life outside of work, school, etc. I think is something that I've always valued a lot. It's always been super important to me, something that I don't want to say I'm not willing to budge on, but that I value a lot, and I think some people in academia, I've noticed, especially research as well, have this idea that academia and research is supposed to be your whole life. You're supposed to work. Your work is supposed to be your life, essentially. And I think that's been a huge obstacle that I still think I'm trying to combat, honestly, day to day. Like even yesterday, I had this encounter with a graduate student in my lab, and she wanted me to like stay in the lab until 9 p.m. and finish this experiment. And I had a genetics exam the next day, and I was like putting my foot down. I'm like, that's not a realistic expectation when you know that I have an exam tomorrow. Standing up for yourself in those times can be really difficult. Putting your foot down to people
Mhm.
that are above you, and letting them know when things aren't realistic. And I was like, school is my priority in this case. I have an exam tomorrow. I'm not gonna go to sleep at 3 a.m. just so I can do this when I could also just do it next week. Things like that. I feel like combating a little bit of, like you were saying, people thinking how they did it is how now you have to do it, things like that. And I don't succumb to that. I really don't believe that. And I'm kind of in your path. I'm like, also a little bit of an outside of the box thinker, and I'm like thinking of a new different way to do things and conveying that to people, trying to get them to see that
Mhm.
it doesn't have to be the way that it's always been. It's
Yeah.
probably been my biggest obstacle, honestly.
Wow. Wow. That's an interesting one. Yeah, just trying to have some balance. How do you feel like you find balance?
I feel like I find balance by planning. So I think, when you're going to get XYZ done, to then have this amount of free time, time to yourself, I think is really important. But I think it requires that extra bit of planning. So you're not like, oh, I want to do something Friday, but I didn't finish XYZ assignment. It's like, no, then you have to do those assignments this day so that you are able to get things done. I think it
Mhm.
requires a lot more planning, but I think it's so, so, so needed, especially when we see, I realize how long the path is, even after medical school. Like, it doesn't end, so it's something that you really have to get used to implementing that balance early on, or else you're never going to do it.
Wow, that's good. That's really
Yeah.
good advice. Did you come up with that on your own? You discovered that, or you said you've been you've been focused on that for a while, or is that
I
something that's
think even going to Michigan, people are big proponents of, even think about like, oh, we all go watch football games every Saturday, things like that, doing things outside of school. When we went on a tour of the big house, it was interesting. They were talking about how some schools like U Chicago and all of these things dismantled their football programs because they just wanted people to focus on academics. They thought if they had students sitting in the stadium every Saturday, they would perform worse academically. So it was kind of this big divide. And yeah, it was this they had, I think, even a better football team than Michigan they used to. And then they just completely dismantled their program, they were saying. And I think it's kind of also culturally a thing at Michigan to not just have your work be your entire life and go to the football games every Saturday, have that
Mhm.
outside things going on in your life. So I think honestly going to Michigan was a huge help in me learning how important that was. And so I don't even think I knew that I was going to have so much a focus on that until I went to Michigan. That definitely wasn't something that I was thinking about in high school or anything like that. It's like you come to Michigan, there's so much fun stuff going on, but you also want to do well in school, you know. You have to
Yeah.
quickly adapt and balance. And some people don't. They focus too much on one or the other, you know. And there's it can end badly both ways. I think it's important to think about. Like it can
Yeah.
also be really detrimental to just focus on school and end up the end of the 4 years. Like you were saying, networking is so big. And I just think about how many people I meet by not studying all the time, you know, and how important that is. Like it's as much who you know as what you know. So I
Hmm.
think that's also huge, and not just locking yourself away in a library till 3 a.m. every night as well. It's
Hmm.
actually more beneficial in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good stuff, Gab. It's so true. I love that. I want to hear about like your support system. Like I would love to know, kind of now that you're like right at the finish line. And so if you were
Almost.
to look, what do you think has been like, and I'm thinking in terms of things that university, offers, but even things outside, like, but we can start with what the university has made available to you. Like what do you think have been the really helpful supports for you? Most.
Yeah, I think the number one is, like you were saying a little bit, finding the right people to study with, people that know what you don't know, and you can also help them. Because I think teaching is the best way that I've been able to learn. And so finding the other people that sit in the front of the class, go to office hours, things like that, and being like, oh, I'm going to study with,
Mhm.
is one of my biggest support systems.
That's a good one.
As you take these classes, there's the
Mhm.
same few people, that are doing that in each class, and, you get to familiarize yourself with them. So that's definitely one support system, I would say. Also, this goes a little bit with the balance, but making sure that you don't do too much in a semester, so that I don't take Orgo and PChem and genetics all at one time, spreading things out, making use of the fact that you have multiple semesters to take
Mhm.
these classes. I think people fall into the trap of, I just want to be done. I want to graduate or all this stuff. And it's like, no, you can, be with an advisor, plan
Yeah.
how you can
Did you have
actually
a university help with that? Did you have an academic advisor help you with your
Yes,
schedule?
that is another huge thing. Once I decided neuroscience was my major, I made an academic advising appointment. And a really, really, really good tip is to do it with the head of the department. So I don't know if every school allows you to do this, but Michigan tells you the title of who you're going to be meeting with for your academic advising appointment. And so I'm looking for the highest up person that I possibly can, because they're going to know the most information to tell me. So when I, signed up for that first academic advising appointment to declare my major, I did it with the head neuroscience program, and
So
he
that was an advisor in neuroscience, like the head in the
yeah, he
advising.
was the head of the neuroscience department. But you can set up an academic advising appointment with anyone. It's part of everyone's job,
Oh,
that works at the
wow.
university, to do
Okay.
advising, really. So when I set up my academic advising appointment, I did it with the head of the department. He helped me organize my entire schedule for the next 3 years of best way to do things, and that was really helpful. Even when he went on sabbatical, he still would like respond to my emails. When I did my summer internship at Harvard, there was a recorded research presentation that he came to, in as well. So that was super important. I think if you're doing these academic advising appointments, sometimes they can be a little bit just bad. People don't really know what information to tell you. So I think going to the highest up person possible for advising. Also, just utilizing things like graduate student office hours, it's important to get questions answered. I also think teaching, trying to get a teaching job, whatever school you are at, such a great support system, really beneficial, because teaching something is the best way to learn it. And it's crazy how interconnected every single class is. You don't realize you're kind of learning the same thing over and over again until you start teaching a class while you're taking other ones, and you're like, oh, I'm learning about this in my class right now. And it's the same thing that I'm
Mhm.
teaching. And I think that's really beneficial, because you just know the information inside out after you teach it once or twice.
Wow. Now,
It's
what
huge.
classes did you teach?
I've actually only taught Bio 172. I've stayed with that class since this is like my fourth semester TA. And
Okay.
when you're a TA at Michigan, you lead a whole discussion section. Like you're actually teaching,
Hmm.
grading, all things like that. That's
Yeah.
probably my support systems.
Wow. That's pretty good. I love that.
Yeah.
So we're adding on to the list. I just heard teaching and getting academic advising help from the like the highest in the department. So that's good stuff. End with a hot topic.
Okay.
So, there's a lot going on in the world right now. There
Yes.
is. So I think in the headlines just this week, there was an arrest made of a graduate student on the College of Columbia. It was a pro-Palestinian student and, protester, like leading protests. He
Yeah.
was recently arrested along with some other students on the College of Columbia's campus. And so people are questioning, just the right for free speech on college campuses. There's also, a current dismantle of just diversity initiatives across the board, across the country. So we've got DE&I offices being closed and they've been deemed unconstitutional.
Yeah.
And then even last year we had the recent change in legislation with affirmative action. So those are a lot. I'll let you pick. From which one of those three would you like to give me your opinion? I'll let you decide.
I'll
So
do the affirmative action one because I think it's really interesting. And I've
okay.
done a lot of, I think it also plays in all of those, is why I'm choosing that one because it brings up an interesting point. There's this really, really interesting podcast episode I listened to, and it's called When Affirmative Action Was White. And it's really interesting because it talks about the roots of affirmative action and how it really did just start off as something to get more white women in college. Like it used to be colleges were predominantly made up of white men. And so the initiative behind affirmative action was just to get more white women into college, not anything else. And it's kind of evolved over the years to try and increase the amount of enrollment of students of color. But it's never really fully been able to do that from how much backlash it gets from universities, public opinion, like you were saying, calling things like DEI unconstitutional. There's always been that pushback. People don't want to admit that it helped them once, and that it could possibly help other people is, I think, super interesting because I think everything starts as a little bit of a leg up. Everyone started from some kind of leg up. Even having someone in your family that went to college before you is a leg up, even if you don't want to admit that to yourself, And so I think people fail to realize how much privilege, is really going into their background. And that's a huge, huge thing behind it. People don't want to admit that they might have it easier than someone else because they feel like what they did was really hard.
Yeah.
Things can be true at once. Like
Mhm.
people can have a hard time, it can be hard to get into schools, whatever, but that doesn't deny the fact that it's still easier for you than it is for other people, That's really what it talks about. It's like affirmative action didn't start as this thing to get Black kids into college, even though they had a lower average SAT score, It was helping white women at first, and no one had a problem with it when it was doing that. And then when it started helping people of color, then it started to become this issue all of a sudden, And I think that's kind of underlying fact between all of this is, there's really just a lot of racism behind it that people don't want to admit, They don't want to know it's unconstitutional. It's not fair. You're discriminating against white people. There's a huge racist undertone in all of those comments because they don't have a problem with, they only want to get rid of these DEI programs, affirmative action. And there was a New York Times article, I think, saying that more of Harvard's student body was made up of legacy admitted students than Black students. But I think it was like 4 times as many students admitted to Harvard were legacies. And
Yes,
as
you're
they're at
absolutely right. Yeah, that's the interesting point in that case. And I don't know how many people really truly know those numbers. And you're right.
Yeah.
The case, because it was a group of Asian students, right, that were upset they weren't being admitted into Harvard proportionally with, African American students. And I think those percentages are really, really small. It was like 9%, somewhere between like 9 and like 14%. Whereas the number of preference given to legacy students is much more significant. I want to say it's maybe around 25%. It's a much bigger percentage, but it's really interesting that that case went after the other minority group. To me, it's almost like we're fighting at the bottom of the barrel. We're like fighting over crumbs, opposed to there are other preferences that are being made, but they didn't target those. Because the reality is, like you said, there are the racial undertones that we know they're likely not going to win against legacy high donor family members. They're not going to win that case. So, it's like a low man on a totem pole fight. Like we're fighting over these like 9 spaces where there are, like 30 or 100 more spaces that are also being held for privilege. But we're not going to acknowledge those. We're just going to fight over these, like, these chair. So yeah, it is. It's true.
All these things, I always just think about how much they give to, like you were saying, these privileged groups, these spots for donor families and things like that. And it's exactly what you said. We're really fighting over the crumbs when half of it's being given away. I'm not saying that it's whatever reasoning people have behind it. Okay, legacies, they've already done it, whatever reasoning behind it, that's also unearned. As much as people think DEI is a free handout, that's a free handout,
It is.
as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's more of a free handout as well, because people fail to realize that it actually is harder, when you're coming from a low income background or things like that. It is harder, but people don't
Yeah.
want to really admit that. So,
Thank you so much for your time
of
today.
course.
And I look forward to staying in touch.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.